with that, let's jump into Aether Skies, Taverns, Hangouts, Black Markets. All right, Ted, how are you feeling about this topic?
So one of the things that I thought about this, taverns have got to be, a big thing because, you always talk about, or you always hear about, the sailors and the pirates always needing to unwind after, a journey. So it doesn't matter whether you're sailing on the sea or sailing on the air currents, you're going to need taverns. But then I got to thinking about, while there are floating cities, like we've kind of hinted at, there are other little islands and things that are out there. So like, what if you had some, taverns and things that are like waypoints that are literally just, the island, this little floating island is one building. It's got a place to rest, it's got a dock, it's got a place to get, food. I think that could be a really cool thing to have it's out there, so you're not just, eating ship grog, or drinking ship grog and whatnot. You could go get something real in between, in the middle of your journey.
Yeah, so I was giving this some thought, and when it comes to taverns, you're gonna have your normal taverns with, you're gonna have gambling and other games of chance, or maybe throwing darts, throwing daggers, just like you would have in a regular medieval fantasy setting. But in Aether Skies, there's also this underlying sports themes, right? So I imagine there's going to be sports bars, sports taverns, right? And we haven't really discussed how high up the tech goes, right? As far as what an Aetherficer can do. Now, the most powerful stuff that's been done is kind of like in the past, and they've reversed engineered a lot of stuff from it, but they're not capable of doing. They can't raise a new city, right? For instance, right? That is beyond them right now. That technology is kind of lost. But that being said, we've talked about, well, are there kind of Aether view screens, magic view screens, where they can watch the games taking place? If you're not lucky enough to get to an arena, or even if there's not an actual view screen where they're doing maybe illusions or holograms or something like that. What about just a voice thing? They're able to almost like a radio, and describe the action that way.
So I would look at that as if you wanted to take the modern day sports bar. Now, Scry is a powerful level spell, but if you were to add in more and more qualifiers, you would be able to kind of reduce the magic necessary to make that happen. So what if you made these devices that technically had the ability to scry solely on the ether pitch, or whatever we're calling the sphere.
The arena, right? So
the arena.
What if it was like a dimensional door almost that connects the two things, except for the only thing that you can do is look, right? You can look and sit here, right? You can't actually go through it. And dimensional door is only a 4th level spell, technically, right? And and also you don't have the other capabilities of scrying. That's the way to go about it, and that's definitely a thing to look at. But even if we decide not to do that, I could definitely see Aetherball-themed tavern at the very bare minimum. And I can also see some brawls breaking out depending on which tavern you're in and who you root for.
Completely.
We have to have our Philly version, where the fans are all trash, basically. Sorry, Philly.
That's part of of being from the Philly, South Jersey area.
Yeah, but you guys are horrible. You threw batteries at Santa Claus. I love that. But yeah, so I think that's going to be a big part of it, and but then also there's this other part that we haven't talked about as much, but the idea of when the fallen city of Haven returns, psychics begin awakening throughout the cities, and I feel like this is going to lead to two different areas. One is occult shops, and even probably occult hangouts, right? They have tea houses or their own bars where they like to gather, or there are going to be more people that are going to be palm readers and fortune tellers. Some of them might be legit, right? They're actual mentalists because they've had this psychic ability that's awakened in them. But there's also going to be a lot of charlatans as well.
Yeah, so I think you could take that and have things that are more accessible to that psychic. You could have those palm readers or card readers or whatnot that make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more diverse.
Even I think a little bit about the Dresden Files, and you have Max Place. I don't even remember the actual name. Or is it just? Or is it always just called Max?
McAnally's Pub.
Okay. right? Like, where it's kind of set up like that, it's kind of themed, and it's like a neutral place where people from the occult can come and hang out and organize. But I would say the other thing too is we have the 13 cities. So depending on what city you're in is going to make a huge difference as well. There's cities that have multiple Aetherball teams, right? Like Grundlehelm has 3. So there's probably bars that probably kind of like the patrons will come from any of them, but some of them I imagine are just like very themed towards either the gremlins or the griffins or Grundle grinders, right? But then there's a city like Theopolis, right, which is it's religious, it's huge stronghold. In that place, right, it's very somber, and they may outlaw the occult there straight up. Who don't like Nether, but they're not going to probably like this new magic that people are talking about either. So you can get a different experience depending where you go.
Completely, and that's how things are like in any kind of city. You go to this tavern versus that tavern, and it's going to be very different. So it doesn't really matter the setting as much. The tavern keep, the reason for starting a tavern. All of these things really need to be taken into consideration. So like you could have, if we're looking at sports bars, in Aether Skies, you could just be like, look, this is a generic bar because the city has 3 teams, so therefore, okay, well, we're not going to cater to one. We'll gladly show all the games that any of them are playing in, but it's a scenario of how rowdy is it going to get? How what type of fan is this going to be attracted to this location? What kind of fan is attracted to this location, and why? So like the tavern, and then the that's what I'm looking for. The people that come to it, are the second part of that equation. So your locals, your regular customers, are gonna help shape that. I mean, if you look at a thing like Cheers, do you have a norm? Do you have that dude who just always seems to be there?
Yeah, so you can start filling out like colorful NPCs. In Aether Skies and in the city of New Renwick, it's run by the gnomes, and it's considered the entertainment capital. It's full of casinos and brothels. It doesn't have gambling halls. It just has full casinos, and it's like kind of a touristy place where other people from the other cities will kind of come and unwind and relax and spend their hard-earned cash in hopes of winning. Well, the house usually keeps
house wins.
Yeah.
So I would imagine a city like that, needs to have far more, inns and taverns, to house the people who are willing to travel and come to such a resort-like location.
I'm imagining a thriving black market of, corrupted goods as well as, scavenged from the surface world, right? Like the cities themselves probably try to regulate what comes and goes from the city, in and out of the city, especially from the surface, because there is a concern that bringing back things that are contaminated and cleaning, they're going to want to keep that locked down. So there's probably a whole trade in smuggling that stuff in, and then places to sell it to the highest bidder.
Absolutely. I mean, just like you have those in the real world that want forbidden or hard to receive or hard to get stuff. Anything from the surface, it could just be a matter of prestige. It's like, oh, well, I have this thing here that's been, snuck aboard, blah, 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 just for my private collection. And when you start taking in, cult aspects that we talked about, last time, it's a scenario that, you're going to have elements that is like, well, the cults are going to want the things that are drawn to whatever it is that they're into, like the eldritch horrors that they're trying to bring back to the world. So like anything that connects to the outer realm, they're gonna be like, okay, how do I get my hands on it? So there's gonna be legit, and there's gonna be fake stuff that's associated with anything that somebody wants. Playing with that law of supply and demand.
Yeah, and also too, like I also see like these occult shops, being like kind of like being like Barnes and Nobles in a sense where like they have nooks and stuff to kind of hang out. In addition to, a place to buy goods, maybe they give lectures, maybe a little offbeat slam poetry from time to time. But it would also be a great place for actual cultists to use as meeting spots. And and even like dead drops for spies and shit like that. You probably have a mix of like the normies that are just kind of curious. Then you probably have folks that are actually psychics and into part of this world, and then those who are trying to become part of this world.
Right.
So it becomes this like melting pot for the different cities. And then some of them may actually fall into the black market area too, right? Like if you're in the religious city of Theopolis, chances are they're going to crack down on this stuff. They don't allow them in the city, but that doesn't mean there won't be.
Yeah, I'm picturing a, I don't know why, but a shyster psychic, somebody who comes and basically, they've got a shop, they've got all of the, occult stuff, and most of the stuff in their shop is going to be complete and utter junk. There to, make a fast, couple of coins.
Or to impress the streets, right?
Huh?
Or to
impress the streets, yeah. But in actuality, they really do have the power. They just aren't going to use it on somebody who doesn't have any clout, or they just don't feel is worth the expenditure of their ether, of their energy. So I love this idea of somebody who's like, well, I can do it for real, but I'm not gonna. And then they could have this whole spot in the back, where it's kind of like you pull the right book and there's a back room with all the real shit where the cult actually meets, where they do whatever rites and things that they're gonna do. And I just the more I get into it, the more like this begins to like bend and twist into a fun place to play with, because I don't know, it just seems like this would be a fun NPC to put in the game somewhere.
Sure, like I do like that idea, and also part of it is like you said, one is like, oh, I'm not going to waste and expend my energies on the streets, but also at the same time they kind of have to eat, right? So they put on the performance, and they do the thing to make people happy and come back. But every once in a while, right, someone comes in who's the real deal, and they do have the ability to service them either through goods or through their powers. And it is interesting in the sense too, like when I just imagine someone who's the real deal observing this and going like, why are you doing this? Like, why pretend to do the thing that you actually know how to do, right? And like you said, they just think the kind of the vanilla clientele is just they're beneath their abilities and aren't really deserving of it.
Right.
So they try and just give them a little thrill and send them on their way.
So kind of touching on the idea of illegal goods, black markets, and what have you. Given the fact that each of the 13 cities, has essentially its own government, its own ruling, and the fact that they're a little, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't like to intermingle. What did you call it?
They're xenophobic.
Xenophobic, thank you. For some reason, I'm like xenothropic. That's not right.
Xenomorphs? They're xenomorphs.
Sorry, my brain is a little fried today. But the fact that they're xenophobic, they're not gonna like, oh, well, let's pass notes and make this all work together. So what one city might consider illegal, another city might not give a crap. So you could have somebody who's like, okay, well, I'm gonna gather up all these things and I'm gonna sneak it into the other city because it's okay to have it here, but lots of people want it over there and they'll pay a lot more for it.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of avenues to explore Aether Skies, and where people are going to spend their time hanging out. Also it's very urban, right? So I feel like there's going to be things like opera houses. You can hear the orchestra play. There's going to be theater. There's going to be thriving nightlifes and places for people to do and be entertained. Because you scram a lot of people into a city and give them nothing to do. That's just asking for trouble.
That's a recipe for a lot of bad.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think there's a ton of stuff that can be done with that, and specific to the setting. Do they have like things like bungee jumping, or because everything is air based? Have they made like gliders that they kind of like race around the city? Which could be kind of risky too if you miss.
It stems from the same issue with It's skydiving. Yes, there are a small handful of people who have jumped out of a plane and their parachute not open, and they've managed to live. But those people are few and far between. Most of the time, you impact on a solid surface and you don't get back up. So in this situation, if you go off on your glider and you don't angle the right way and you don't get back to the city before you get to a certain elevation, you've got nowhere to go but down. And sure, your wings might allow you to glide safely, but you're not getting back up. And if you don't have gear to survive on the surface, you're going to die from something down there.
Yeah, if you do survive the landing, not surviving the landing might have been the merciful.
Yeah.
As the horrors come out at night. So it's just a short list of things to do in Aether Skies when it comes to taverns, hangouts, and the black market. All right, let's take a look at Under the Dome. So Under the Dome, taverns, hangouts, and black markets, hotspots of Vice Grit, and Grind of Crystallia. So first and foremost, central to the city of Crystallia anyway is the tiny dome, which is the lower city's central Bloodsport Coliseum, where you can go out and make a buck and increase your reputation, and that is at the center of an area called the Spokes. And off of the Spokes are all of the various fighting schools, right? The gladiator schools where you can actually join and train, and you're gonna have to pay some of your winnings to them, but you get training, you get gear, you get everything that they have to offer. Maybe healing, or massages afterwards, whatever you need to keep going as a fighter. But that's only one thing to do in Crystallia and there's street racing, drag racing. So I feel like you're gonna have basically sports bars just dedicated to that, where the racers all hang out. Whether it's officially what that tavern is all about or not, it's gonna end up that way because that's what the clientele is. That's who's there. The Grotto Gruffs, the first campaign I ran, those players are called the Gruffs because the one character who they call boss is very goat themed, and the place that they hang out is called the Grotto, and it's like a public garage where you rent bays / tavern is, I believe, how I described that in the beginning. So what could go wrong? Racing, mechanics, and booze.
Alcohol.
all the essential things you need.
Yeah, and once you start, it's gonna tinker around with, your bike or your vehicle, what have you, all kinds of shit can go wrong when, I'm using my fuel, which is grind in this, grind can go wrong. Grind can, have problems. So what happens if something goes wrong? This dude's over here drinking, while this dude's over here working on a bike, and spark kablooey. Now the shit's really hit the fan.
Yeah. So
oh god.
I was just gonna say, unique to Under the Dome, and so far Crystallia, I don't know what Ted's gonna do, but there's a race of humanoid chinchillas called nibblers, and they don't want to get their fur wet. It's bad for chinchillas. They use dust to bathe in. So there's dust baths, these bathhouses that are basically pools of dust that they go roll around in and kind of relax. And I'm probably sure they offer different amenities, maybe different temperatures for the dust, for a different experience, as well as, they're called nibblers because they're always chewing on something to grind down their teeth, usually stone or wood. And they probably have different types of those things that you can get at these places. In fact, the parties even visit it at least once.
Yeah, you can get it directly, from one of these bathhouses for a surcharge, of course. In the city that I'm working on, Valeria, set in the middle of the Black Sands. This, for whatever reason, this place, has chaos storms that fairly often transport people and things from other places, not necessarily just from the setting of Under the Dome, but from elsewhere. Now, I recently ran my first section of Under the Dome for one of my newly created home groups, and I told the players, like, look, you guys can make characters from anywhere, and I literally ripped them from wherever they were. I gave this cool, narrated scene where they were ripped out of their location and dropped into the Black Sands.